terrorists. Almost 100 of them are being considered for release from prison by the parole board. Terror offenders like those you can see here, Nizam Hussain, Jack Coulson, Rangzib Ahmed, Jawad Akbar and Abdul Rauf Abdullah, all could be considered for release from prison next year by the parole board. There are 92 active and ongoing terror cases, some that could come before parole judges, which will be determined next year.
But it all depends on how long it takes to gather the evidence needed for hearings, as these cases are often described as complex. Terror offenders must now serve 2/3 of their sentence before being eligible for release. Well, Dr. Alan Mendoza is the co-founder, executive director of the Henry Jackson Society. And good morning to you. This is one of those stories which seems to be so out of step with the public mood. Everybody who's been contacting us this morning saying, look, these are convicted terrorists. They shouldn't even be considered for parole.
Oh, absolutely. Look, I think this is one of these farcical situations where, if you recall, until the legislation changed recently, they were automatically being released. Now we've got a situation where the government has thankfully at least changed that and has meant that they have to be assessed before being released. But yes, it's quite right to assume that, these are hardened terrorists in many cases. Why would you want them on the streets before their sentence is actually ended?
So just to clarify then, they're reviewing whether or not they can be released early, as you say, before their sentences are complete. But they wouldn't be able to keep them behind bars beyond that sentence, would they, under these conditions?
No. Once you get a sentence, your sentence is your sentence, the tariff is served, and then you're released beyond that time. What we're talking about at the moment is the situation where they're allowed to be released early.
I'm just wondering, with all that's going on, with all the pressures on public services that we have at the moment, how important is it that these parole boards should be having these investigations that clearly cost money, take time that could be spent elsewhere?
Well, I mean, that's a very good point. Why should we be lavishing public resourcing on letting the most dangerous criminals out of prison? It would seem obvious that if you had to prioritise, you would just say, look, you people are the most dangerous sorts, we're not letting you out. And as a result, you will stay in until your sentence is served. So there is certainly a question mark about the viability of this sort of decision. At the same time, of course, look, the situation is that everyone is entitled to at least, be looked at in this consideration. And until that is changed, you may have to consider whether these people are actually allowed their hearings. But as you heard, it is a lengthy process to get the necessary evidence to work out how dangerous they are. My view is simple. If in any doubt, leave them in.
Yeah, and as you know, 25 cases have been heard so far. More than 50% of those have been refused parole by the parole board. 11 of them have been freed. But that begs the question about those that have been refused early release. When their sentences come to expire, are they safe then, miraculously? Does more money and investment need to be spent on rehabilitation and trying to make sure that extremism isn't being spread within the prison walls?
Well, that's certainly the case, of course, that you don't want extremism to be spread. But the problem here is that we're dealing with people who were extremists when they went into prison. So it's not that they've been further radicalised while in there necessarily. It's that they went in with bad ideas. Those ideas, in the case of those who've not been, paroled, may have simply gotten worse as a result of their, kind of discussions internally. There are, of course, programmes to try and de-radicalise. The problem is that you can't be certain that these programmes ever work. And we've seen cases where jihadists have come out of prison, for example, pretended to have been de-radicalised, then committed terror attacks afterwards. So this, of course, poses a huge problem for security services, who, if terrorists are allowed out, either at the end of their sentences or before, have to, of course, monitor them. And the problem here is that you're then spending a lot of money on surveillance of people you're not certain about should be released at all.
But there's the point, and it's experience. I mean, I call us cynical, but we've seen, as you say, examples of convicted terrorists being released only to go and commit further acts of terrorism. You only need one of those to do that again, and this whole argument is pointless. And we just turn around and say, well, yeah, we could have told you that, but nobody seems to listen.
Yes, it is a sort of stunning logical argument that you've just made there about why this is, in general, a bad idea. And as you say, just one of these people who turns out not to have been de-radicalised in prison decides to go and commit a crime again, and you have this whole debate opening up in public. It's surely better not to have the debate in the first place. I think most people in the public out there would simply go as follows: people are given a prison sentence; they need to serve all of it. That's the obvious sort of point of being sent to prison. This idea that you come out for the most serious crimes with good behaviour. This isn't sort of a shoplifting case or some fraud issue. This is an example of people who have tried to murder their fellow citizens. I mean, this is obviously a qualitatively different sort of crime, and at that point you have to sort of consider whether there's any value at all in allowing for early release.
Dr. Alan Mendoza, really good to talk to you this morning, co-founder and executive director of the Henry Jackson Society. Thank you.